The topic some people find very complicating, honestly, but well, lucky for us, we have professionals who are here to make it very simple for us. So we are really happy to host this webinar, and this is going to be a very exciting discussion. As we know, policy for any sovereign nation or even any establishment at all, policy defines the boundaries of power and freedom. It says what you can do, to what extent you can do it, and where exactly you can or should not go. So policy is a very powerful thing. And today, our topic is on climate and energy policies, the role of policy in energy trends in countries. So, and as we all know, also that with respect, policy cuts across everything from justice to economics to security to even market and now climate and energy. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion. And today we are having this discussion about the role of policy on climate. And I'm happy to welcome our professionals, our speakers for this discussion. Before I go, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Abdullah Ilakin from Nigeria, and I'm your host for today. It's really a big pleasure to host everyone here on today's session. Our speakers, Jacopo and Onyeka, our new arts team. I can see Shalom, I can see Jonathan, Nikisa, Enoch, and every other person. Then the participants. It's really a pleasure to host every one of you. So back to the topic of the day. We have two speakers for the session today, and they are going to take us through the diagnosis of the depth of how policy affects our daily life, how climate policy specifically affects our daily life, and then the effectiveness of climate policy globally, and even more importantly, how it affects people across the continent. So I think a special peg to this is the fact that our speakers are even going to touch on how climate policies, the roles that youth have in making policies even more effective. So we'll be having two speakers, and first we'll be having Onyeka before we move to Dr. Jacobo. So I would like to introduce Onyeka first as our first speaker. And Onyeka is an oil and gas energy regulator. She works in the oil and gas industry. She's a professional member of the SPE, Society of Professional Engineers, and she is also a member of the Nigeria Environmental Society, the Nigeria Institute of Management. She's really a very good professional, and she's a seasoned regulator in the Nigeria oil and gas industry. And she has had careers across areas of science, technology, sustainability, and even policy management. And funnily enough, she has a background in biotech, and she graduated from the prestigious University of Benin as one of the top graduates. And she began her professional journey in as an environmentalist in the energy oil and gas sector, and has since rose through the rank to become one of the leading voices in policy interpretation, policy development, and implementation of data-driven policies. So also, her impact has gone both beyond local and national users. She has gone to even the global stage, and we are really happy to host Onyeka today to speak on the topic of to speak on our truths about policy impacting GDP, trade, and jobs in Africa. So welcome with me, everyone, Onyeka Jebrela, to please make the topic to speak on to educate us today. Is the weather still there?
Should I project from my side since I have the slides?
Is there an issue from my end, or can I project the slides?
Yes, she may need to rejoin the meeting again. I'm trying to send to her the meeting ID and the passcode.
All right,
My sincere
that's
apologies,
fine.
everyone.
So while Yeah, that's fine. And while waiting for her, I would like to just throw us a very a few tasks. As we all know, policy is very complicated and it can be a very tasky job. I would like to throw us a question. We can decide to either unmute our mics or answer in the chat box. So, what role do we think youths have to play in the climate policy space? Anything, any idea that we think? We know policy discussions are often more like things reserved for highly professional or even I know it's a discussion that often leaves youth behind and so I think it is becoming more mainstream today that youth actually have a role to play. So do we have an idea? So somebody want to speak to this? What specific role do we think youths have in making policies effective?
Hello.
Yeah, please go on, Olumide.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hassan Elumbe. I work with the Ogun State Waste Management, Authority. I believe youth have, a great role to play, given the fact that youth across the globe are unrelenting, and I don't think youth in Nigeria, in particular, I must be speaking about Nigeria, have any other option than not to be left behind, given the existential threat that climate change poses to everyone. Because God forbid, at the risk of sounding, religious, if adventure we eventually cross the tipping point, no one will be left behind. Not even the youth will be immune from the consequence of climate change. That is my single token about that, sir. I think I'm done.
Thank you so much. That's a very beautiful idea, and that's just I think that captures it. No one will be left behind if we get to the tipping point. Both the youth and the old, the professionals and the so-called young professionals, we are all affected. Our views need to be reflected in the policies that um are given to us or projected upon us. So thank you so much for that, Olumide. Do you have any other opinion? Anyone might want to add to this discussion? What role do you think you have to play in making policies more effective as a youth? Oh, all right. So, while we wait for Gabriela, I think we are going to change a bit of our schedule. We will be having Dr. Jacopo here first. So, sorry, pardon me. I think it's very exciting to have Dr. Jacopo here because she is bringing a a transatlantic perspective to this discussion. And given the fact that is a Dr. Jacopo is a research assistant, a research associate, sorry, a research associate at the Florence School of Regulation, the European University Institute, and is going to be taking us through the um, European Union Emission Trading System, which is the largest and the most established trading system in the world. And it's also going to touch on new insights from the space working paper and how the European reforms are echoing beyond borders. So just a bit of introduction about Dr. Jacobo. He's a research associate at the climate area of the Florence School of Regulation, European University Institute since 2003. He's also a member of the Horizon Europe Project Space, Sustainability, Performances, Evidence, and Scenarios. Previously, he has been a research assistant at the Department of Business and Law of the University of Senior, partner at the Open InnoTrain European Consortium, and he was also a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Economics of the University of Florence. He has a background in economics from the same university, and also another background in sustainable development and environmental economics from University of St. Andrews. He holds a PhD in business administration and management from the University of Pisa, and Dr. Cammeo has participated in academic conferences, scientific meetings organized by several international institutions, and he has always been there to contribute as an expert, especially in policy discussions. So join me everybody to welcome Dr. Jacopo Cammeo to take us through the discussion. It's really a pleasure to have you here today, sir.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And also thank you to the organizer for the kind invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. And I can start sharing the slides, my screen. In any case, I'm going to present some slides, but please feel free every time to interrupt me, ask me questions, so we can also discuss about what I'm saying. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. We can, yeah, we can see.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So maybe we can do like this. Perfect. I'm starting. Okay, so from the organizer, I've been asked to talk about this very interesting topic, and working in the climate field, I would be super glad to do that. I hope I will tell you something new. Also, my presentation will start from the basics. So in the beginning, I will go quite quick, just to remind to all of us, also to myself, what we are talking about. Just okay, perfect. It works. Okay, the present introduction. No need to do that because Abdullahi did this perfectly. Then we talk about briefly about the history of global climate frameworks, starting from the 90s, let's say, focusing on a specific case that is the European one with the emissions trading system and its evolution in a carbon border adjustment mechanism. Then I will provide some policy recommendations, and as I said, the presentation is open to audience ideas, thoughts, comments, questions, whatever you want. And then at the end, I will try to answer the ambitious question, how can young people make effective policies? Because when we talk about the environment, it's definitely starting from the definition of sustainable development, is definitely about the future, also current, but also future generations. So young people are definitely involved in this process. As Abdullahi said, I will also discuss a few findings from this Horizon Europe project SPES. It is basically about sustainability and how to propose a new framework in the field of sustainable human development to foster the coevolution of all the dimensions of sustainability, sorry, like the equity empowerment, but also the protection of the environment, human security, so how to be safer from conflicts and so on. And this is why that's the reason why. Sorry, the reason why I'm also discussing the results from this project is because in the consortium, the UI where I work is part of the consortium, but we have also a couple of partners from the so-called the Global South, especially PEP is Partnership for Economic Policies, which is a research center in Kenya, So I will also present some results from their works. And let me just give another few seconds to say that also some of the other slides are part of another project coordinated by my director, Professor Simone Borghesi, and the project is about the European emissions trading system. But not only, it's also on the international climate cooperation and how to establish a fair and functioning climate framework in the area of carbon markets. Okay, but I said that I will start from the beginning. The idea is that every time we talk about climate policies and energy policies as well, the main point, to my personal view, is that we must not lose the focus that climate policies are in general part of the solution to a bigger crisis that is the global warming and the impact of the climate change. We know that concern about rising air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions came from like 50 years ago all over the world. And also we know that after the Rio conference in 1992 and the establishment of the United Nations Framework for Climate Change, we started to reflect a little bit more at a global level, so as a unique, without acting unilaterally, but as a whole, with an holistic approach, we started reflecting on this huge crisis, trying to find solutions to mitigate the impacts of climate change. That happened, as you probably know, with the establishment of the treaty which established the UNFCCC, the Convention of Climate Change. In the frame, the UNFCCC member meet usually once a year in the COP, Conference of the Parties, to discuss the importance to act against climate change. And it is in this arena where most of the global climate policies, or at least the political address of climate policies, born. Okay, or here in the first slides, I also wanted to briefly mention the importance of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, of their reports. We are now going towards the 7th report of the IPCC, and the findings are more or less, as you know, the same. That's the Earth's surface temperature and atmospheric carbon dioxide emissions are increasing at an unprecedented speed. So this is quite worrying. And this poses also some challenges in terms of ecological, with increasing in frequent and intense extreme weather events. But also, and that's why I want to start from, this is the trend of temperatures, okay, from an economic impact. So climate policies are there to solve the climate crisis, because it is definitely something which is damaging our planet. Also, population in vulnerable situations are particularly hit by that. And this is also a problem in terms of economic development, let's say, because we know that following this path, the current pattern of increasing temperatures, climate change could reduce global GDP by 10% in more or less 20 years. And as I said, these risks, the climate risks, include distributional impacts. The poorest and population in most vulnerable situation will suffer disproportionately. We know this from some research, for example, from Richard Toll in 2021. We know from the map that at the global level, the economic impact due to climate change with temperatures above 2.5 degrees compared to the pre-industrial period, so above the Paris Agreement, is going to damage, especially, countries near the equator, so, in the middle of the map. And in terms of inequality, climate change is going to hit bad specific continents, and that's definitely not good. Having said that, in 2015 was taken one of the most important institutional initiative, the Paris Agreement. During COP 20, the member states, so let's say most of the countries all over the world, almost 200 partners, decided to sign this agenda, Sustainable Development Goals, with, as you probably know, with 17 goals, 179 targets, more than 200 indicators for achieving more sustainable development by 2030 at the international level. This agenda is not alone because there are different continents or jurisdictions, regions, countries that are also declining the idea of increasing sustainable development, fighting climate change, addressing social inequalities with their own plan, or also adjusting the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is true, for example, for China with their carbon neutrality plan with their plan to be carbon neutral by 2060. India with a similar plan to implement by 2070, or the African continent with the Agenda 2063. All of those plans are complementary to the Sustainable Development Goals, but they are very much rooted in the local context or in the regional context, if we are talking about continents. And okay, I made just these jokes because apparently at this moment, the only, let's say, jurisdiction which is not very active at the United States, but we are confident they will change their mind in the future, let's say. Now, since I'm working for the European University Institute, now I will focus more on what I know better, that is the European context. The European context, let's say, has made a further step with the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal is this complex set of package, let's say, of measures, of regulations related to the environment, to speak broadly. And part of this plan, signed by all the European member states, so from Italy to Spain, France, Hungary, North, South of Europe. Part of this plan is this package, or better to say better, the concrete translation into law of the European Green Deal proposals is the Fit for 55 and the European Climate Law. This is like a package with, okay, so sorry, this is about the European Green Deal, just to give you the framework. The overall aim is to make Europe climate neutral by 2050 with different regulations on renewable energy, circular economy, sustainable agriculture. So it's a very complex deal, financed only in the first 7 years of implementation with almost 1,000 billion euros. So it's quite ambitious. And I was saying about the Fit for 55, it's like the package which helps to translate the proposals of the European Green Deal into a concrete legislation. And this package should help to reach ambitious climate targets outlined in the EU overarching strategy, that the European Green Deal, as I said. So European Green Deal, Fit for 55, part of Fit for 55, sorry, is the reform of the EU emissions trading system. The emissions trading system are basically a carbon market. So in this market, there are like participants in the covered sectors. And the carbon market works like this. It employs a cap and trade mechanism. There is a cap of emissions that the overall system can emit, sorry for the repetition, in 1 year. And the possibility to trade these emission allowances between partners, between companies. So it's based on the historical emission of a company. If a company emitted like 100 CO2 tons of polluting, that will be its limit. Beyond the limit, if the company wants still to be active in the market, should buy some emission allowances from others. If it stays below the limit, the company can sell its permission to someone else. And in the time after time, during the years, the number of emission allowances in the market slightly decrease, so that at the end of the story, there will be no more emitting industries in the market. The emissions trading system helps to reduce the emissions. Okay, this is the map. Sorry, it's just to say that Europe is not alone in using this mechanism. And also Nigeria is reflecting on developing its own carbon market when we talk about the African continent, and also there are other countries all over the world to use this mechanism, who is expanding. I was saying, since its inception in 2005, the emissions trading system helped to reduce almost 50% of the CO2 emissions in the market. It had different phases of implementation. It's a little bit technical, but what it's really interesting to analyze is that this carbon market system basically impose a cost on some industries. The covered sectors was primarily the energy industry, but then we had like the aviation, iron and steel, and now this mechanism of imposing a cost, let's say, an indirect cost on polluting companies is expanding in different sectors. What the companies do usually is to transfer this extra cost paid to pollute less, let's say, to the consumers with this cost pass-through mechanism. So if, for example, carbon market allowance costs like 60 euros per CO2 tons of polluting emissions, these 60 euros go directly to the consumers. This is like how it works. And this can have like a distributional impact on poorer consumers. And to avoid this, there is this mechanism called the Social Climate Fund. So the revenues of the carbon markets paid by polluted industries to emit less are redirected with a mechanism called the revenues recycling toward a fund called Social Climate Fund to support households, micro enterprises in the transition, also help zero and low emission mobility, or to provide direct income for vulnerable households. So This is the European mechanism, more or less. The European carbon market to pollute less because there is a climate crisis. It's working. It imposes a cost sometimes in a regressive way. So there is this social climate fund to counterbalance the negative effects of the climate measures. The problem is that sometimes the industries, the European industries, to avoid paying this extra cost, relocate their production to other jurisdictions. They move to other jurisdictions. And this is called carbon leakage. Carbon leakage is the idea that emissions-intensive industry could relocate production to another jurisdiction to avoid paying. We know, analyzing the annual CO2 emissions embedded in trade, that Europe, analyzing this data, we know that Europe is particularly exposed to carbon leakage. Because if we look at the, let's say, within continent emissions, Europe is performing well. We can say as a continent, we don't pollute, we are very good, and we are perfect. Our climate policies are perfect. But the reality is that we are talking about the production-based emissions, but if we consider the consumption-based emissions, so the emissions embedded in what European populations consume, this value is definitely higher. It's definitely higher. If you look at this map, this chart, for example, we see that most of the continent, South America, Asia, Africa, are polluting, are not exposed to carbon leakage. They basically don't relocate their production. To mitigate the risk of carbon leakage, one potential way is to create a border carbon adjustment. This is what Europe did. In the Fit of 55 package, there is also the implementation of this carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is a regulatory tool to minimize leakage, safeguard the heavy industry competitiveness, and increase the climate ambition of other countries. This mechanism is new. We are now in the transitional phase, and the permanent system will start on January 1st. And basically, it will cover 6 sectors: iron and steel, aluminium, cement, fertilizer, electricity, and hydrogen. And for such sectors, the CBAM will impose a carbon tax equal to the emission allowances of the emissions trading system. It will impose this CBAM will impose a carbon tax on imports from such sectors. That means that European importers will pay more to import from non-European countries, from trade partners outside Europe, to import, for example, iron and steel. This mechanism is planned to be gradual, and so with a slower rate, and then will increase. And by 2034, the idea is to have all the goods from the sectors I mentioned covered by the CBAM. The CBAM poses some important challenges, because I said that the cost is on the importers. So apparently, this carbon tax on trade is on European importers. But then, also the other trade partners, the exporters outside Europe, could suffer from the economic negative externalities of the measure. Here are some challenges of this CBAM. The first one, CBAM and WTO compatibility. When we talk about WTO compatibility, we can say that this CBAM, this carbon border adjustment mechanism, is probably compatible with WTO regulation, because at the end of the story, it does not discriminate between like products or products from some country and or between its own product, European products, and like foreign products. It imposes a cost that is the same cost of the existing in the European market. And to my view, it's also compatible with WTO regulation because the CBAM will apply to all trading partners, not only to some of them. But there are some other problems, to my personal view. The first one is that in terms of effectiveness, so the idea is to impose, we need CBAM because we need to avoid carbon leakage, but this is not so clear. We don't know if CBAM reduces carbon leakage or not. We don't know if the CBAM is effectively as a climate policy in reducing emissions at the end of the story. We suppose that some studies can confirm, but we are not 100% sure. Also, this measure is a little bit, let's say, biased because it's also used as a competitive leverage at European level. So it's a sort of, it's not protectionism, but it's very close to, and it's definitely something used to protect the European market in specific key sectors. We know this carbon border adjustment mechanism can work as a climate incentive. So it starts in Europe, but then other countries can, like Turkey, Brazil, Malaysia, accelerated their own ETS development in response to CBAM, because this carbon cost is imposed only on countries that don't have their own carbon market. If you have your own carbon market, you don't pay the CBAM cost. So some countries could say, okay, if Europe is a key trade partner to avoid this extra cost, I develop my own carbon market to reduce emissions within the country, and also I will not pay the cost of CBAM when I trade with Europe. The most tricky point to me is that this measure was taken unilaterally by a continent, by Europe, applies uniformly to all trade partners sometimes in perhaps unfair way. That means that it does not comply with the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities principle. The principle according to which all the climate measures should should be implemented in line not only with what we need to do in terms of climate action, but also taking into account the historical emissions, what was done before. So let's say the contribution to climate change, the historical contribution to climate change, and that is definitely high for Europe and for the United States, higher than for China, India, Nigeria, Brazil, and so on. So this is, I think, to me, because sometimes when people talk about this, these European climate policies, which impose a cost to non-European countries, there is always a debate on regulation. But here, to my view, it's not about what is legal. I think that, for example, about CBAM, I think that it's legal. The point is that fair? Is that very much in line with climate justice principles? I don't know. The answer to my view is that it could be if we impose some mitigating measures like financial technical support for trade partners in vulnerable situations, or also exemptions to trade partners who have to particularly deal with the problems of CBAM. Okay, we skip the impact of CBAM in Europe because I don't think it's very much interesting. What is more interesting is the impact of CBAM in the global south. There is this map provided by the World Bank. The World Bank with using some data from World Integrated Trade Solutions and also a couple of academics. They built this index called CBAM Trade Exposure Index, which measure as the name can suggest, it measures the exposure of to CBAM of some countries all over the world, especially the countries which interact more with Europe in terms of commerce, in terms of trade. And we see from the map that quite a lot of countries could be exposed to the mechanism. To conclude my presentation and to leave you the floor, I will present you two studies in the framework of the SPES project in which I'm working. The two studies were performed one by Dr. Salisu and Professor Salisu and Dr. Adediran, and another one by colleagues Jorge Davalos and also Martin Enzler and Hélène Mazonev. The two studies focused on the impact of CBAM on the so-called global south, or even better, on European trade partners. One is an econometric analysis of the macroeconomic effect of CBAM in the global south. And the second one is a country case for Egypt on the distributional effects of these climate policies in Egypt, in the case study country. The first study, okay, here are some key findings. The CBAM could trigger significant GDP losses in European trade partners in the global south. It can reduce real output by up to 2.7% across regions, with as continents Latin America and Africa most affected. CBAM-induced import price shocks lead to exchange rate depreciations. So this is the second secondary effect, but it's still important. And this mechanism can weaken their export position. There are also other negative effects on supply side, on the supply chain. To make it work, policy mitigation is essential. And in this first working paper, compensatory measures like incentives for low emissions countries or climate finance support for Latin American and African countries are recommended. In the second research on Egypt, the results are similar. So this CBAM would not disrupt the economy. It is something managing. Okay, so the overall message is not the end of the world, but still could produce some negative effect. Still could influence the exports of the country, and also impacting on the labor market and on the capital market. And so the conclusion for this second study is that CBAM should need complementary policies such as international climate finance, green technology transfers from Europe to trade partners, and export diversification. this last slide, just to say you that this mechanism is still under revision. The last the last update is from February 2025, and in this case, the European Commission approved to make exemptions for small importers, sorry, they pollute less than an amount, a specific amount, which is 50 tons CO2 per year. And also there was on the table, there were procedural simplifications and delayed certificate obligations for some countries. A broader CBAM review is planned for late 2025 to expand the coverage, but also to align with just transition principles, with targeted aid, differentiated obligations, with the overall idea to proceed, to keep going with the European climate policies framework, but also considering that climate ambition could not forget the fairness, equity, and climate justice principles in the context of international climate cooperation. That's it. I was super quick on some concepts because I just wanted to do a lot of inputs. But then if you need to deepen some aspects, I'm here available. And also, please feel free to write me in the chat now, but also after the event if you need some help. And to conclude, there was also one question. I don't know if it's better to discuss this later or now, but the interesting question posed by the organizers was, how can young people make effective policies? And I reflect a lot on that. My suggestion, from my point of view, which is just personal and may not. It's just based on my experience. Is that talking, interacting with people, knowing not only your context of research, for example, in my case, not only focusing on Europe, but also expanding your view with curiosity, but also with interacting with different partners in terms of academia, business, government, civil society, from local, regional, international contexts, from different continents. So doing a mix, combination of all these aspects can be very helpful, and not only in official gatherings like COP, Conference of Parties, but also in in your work in the academia, and also as future policymakers in even small events when you can talk with each other and discuss uh, climate topics with no prejudice. And then that's it. Thank you so far.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jacopo. It was really a pleasure listening to you, and I really love the perspective from which you have presented this for us. Thank you so much. Just to recap, I really love the fact that you brought it up from you used a ground up approach, starting from the history of the old COP and every UNFCCC. So I think that was really a very good perspective, given the historical background behind all of these issues. And I think one particular thing that stands out to me was the fact that for youth to be very active in this space, you need to expand your view. You need to go read across the policy issues from not just your own continent, but also other continents. So thank you so much. I can say our second speaker is very much with us now. Well, just before we have her, I don't know, can we have one or two questions for Dr. Jacopo? If you have questions, this is your time. I think we should have a lot to ask him, honestly. Owing for him, the father is bringing this Shalom. I can see Shalom. Shalom is raising hands. Who else? Olumide, okay. Shalom first. Oh no, sorry. Let me have Olumide first. Olumide, please go on. Mr. Olumide, are you there? Oh, let's have Shalom then. I think you're really going to go first. Shalom, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Adonai. Thank you so much, Dr. Jacopo. I do have numerous questions that I wrote down, and I'm just hoping that maybe I would still have the opportunity to have this discussion maybe towards the end, because there were some things that you mentioned that I find particularly interesting, and also thinking about the policy, the carbon tax, and even the social impact of the carbon pricing. It's something that is very interesting to me, and I really wanted to learn more about what the EU has been doing, and really how we can transfer some of the knowledge to what is currently existing. But I would want to ask two questions first, and if you can stay with us towards the end, maybe I'll ask more of the other ones. The first was, I think it was slide, the page 16, when you were talking about social inequality. I really wanted to understand what were the metrics to the measured social inequality. Think that the slide was before talking about CBAM. And then the second question that I want to ask now, and then leave the others towards the end, it's about the funds that will be raised from CBAM. I really wanted to understand what the specific cost of CBAM was, and how that can be channeled to the social funds that you mentioned earlier, that, about the carbon trading and the carbon tax, that it's usually um, transformed to social funds. I wanted to know if CBAM also is part of the funds that will be channeled to the social funds.
Okay. I start from the second one. And so when we talk about these funds, just to give you an idea, given that the cost of the ETS is like now it's like 70 euros per CO2 tons, that is quite average, and the cost of CBAM will be the
Recording in
same.
progress.
So we are talking about sorry. I just don't. Okay, perfect. We're talking about a quite important amount of money, let's say. It's like 1 billion euros. But for revenues, recycling for social issues, CBAM is not part of the mechanism. The idea, honestly, I think that the how to use CBAM revenues is still on the plate, let's say. It's a discussion is going on now, and there are some research centers, for example, which advocate for the use of CBAM, and this is what we did also in our working paper, advocating for the use of CBAM revenues to support climate finance for trade partners, because definitely it's something which will hit trade partners. I saw one question on the chat, just to answer also to that one, because it's related to what you said, Shalom. I think that it's not very fair as a measure. On the other side, we have to remember that the EU will not charge exporters, but is going to charge importers. Of course, this could affect also exporters, because we know as as work when we have trade relationships. So it's kind of ambiguous to say, okay, only importers will pay, so exporters are okay. Not, it's not like this. I mean, because when you have a trade relationship, you tend to agree on the price, and so if the importers have to pay, also the exporters will suffer, but will suffer a little bit more, let's say. So it's not very fair, but it's not like imposing costs directly to the producer, but more to the buyer. Okay. And the first question, your first question, sorry, Shalom, can you repeat that
Yes, it was a
on the
question
social?
about the social inequality. What were the metrics? Was it the standard of living? What were the metrics to which it was determined that there was social inequality?
Okay. That's a good question. So at global level, we started with the adjusted Gini index of income inequality. Then in terms of social inequality, the metrics, let me check the slide. Okay. Okay. Basically, apart from macroeconomic metrics, basically, we didn't use a specific statistical metric, but it was more about understanding, and this is quite clear, that the impact of a carbon price on a product is similar to everyone. Okay, is like unilateral, let's say, is like, but everyone does not have the same instruments, So it's a kind of regressive. We could put the same price to different economic subjects, to different people, basically. So it's unequal to us.
Okay, thank you so much. Over to you, Abdullah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think I'm really, yeah, thank you. Starting with the, I'll have to keep you on the tabs until after the second question. After the second discussion actually, because I also have a number of questions for Dr. Jacopo, honestly, but I think we should have Jibril now. So I'd like to bring back the second presenter. Sorry, let me do a bit of intro. Onyeka Jibril. I think she's very much with us now. And Mr. Alumide, please stay on with us. We are still going to take those questions as a round-up conversations after the second presentation. So, just to introduce our second speaker once again, Onyeka Jebra is a professional member of the Society of Petroleum Engineers in Nigeria, the Nigerian Society of Environmental Society, sorry, the Nigerian Institute of Management, and she's also a seasoned regulator in Nigeria's oil and gas industry. She has a background in biotech, and you can see she has really played a very she has been playing a very vital role in the Nigerian oil and gas industry from her biotech background. And she has had a number of impactful contributions in projects across the areas of sustainability, technology, and science. And she brings to this discussion a whole
Hello, Abdullah. Okay, I think we can't hear him again. Does anyone still hear Abdullah? Okay. So maybe I can take it from here and introduce Onyeka. he has already given us a brief about our second speaker, so I'll just call on Onyeka to take the floor for her presentation. And we can welcome her with our round of emojis. Thank you for joining us.
Oh,
We are not
sorry,
hearing you
Shalom.
yet. It's okay. Mr. Onyeka is about to speak.
All right, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Is she fine to present from my side, or can I present for her?
Okay, we should present.
You can present for me.
Okay.
That's fine.
Oh,
Recording in progress.
okay, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So the slide is up. You can just tell me when you need to move to the next slide. I'll be there.
Okay, that works for me. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Onyeka Mbanulisi. I sincerely will first of all want to apologize for I had serious network issues, and then I don't know. I just think I from this meeting I just believe Apple products are actually very troublesome to connect with, but yeah, I'm glad to be here. Again, my name is Onyeka Mbanulisi. I am a regulator in the oil and gas industry. I would be basically focusing on the evolution of climate policies, why climate policies in the first instance, and then generally just giving a general perspective of how these policies have fared and the implications for developing nations, and then just basically talk about how young, promising professionals can come into the policy space so that we can co-develop workable policies for the future. Yeah, so I would just simply continue with my presentation. So basically, slide 2 is just an outline of what I'll be talking about, so nothing to dwell on much. So the slide 3 is basically, please can we go to slide 3? Can you hear me? Okay. So slide 3 is basically talking about what climate change is. So I like to tell people when I have discussions on climate change usually is a natural phenomenon that happens, right, over the course of time. And why does it happen? Because there's activity going around. Human beings are doing their own stuff. There's also activity around the sun and whatnot. Now, these two can fuel together and then, cause changes in weather patterns. Climate change simply changes in weather patterns, such as temperatures and whatnot, right? However, the issue of climate change became a global concern when scientists observing patterns that was affecting the globe. For instance, the early warnings in the 19th to the 20th century that talked about the trap of heat, which we all know as the greenhouse effect, and the increasing greenhouse effect was the planet was getting warmer and whatnot. We also have the 1896 research that quantifies the impact of CO2 on global temperatures. Now, let me backtrack. Beyond these studies to know how human activities affect the planet, over time, human beings have evolved, our needs have evolved. Industrialization came into play, and then there was need for more energy. There was need for electricity, there was need for automobiles, there was need for, basically anything that had to do with, electricity and electrification, which then mean somehow we had to find a way to produce energy that can meet our then needs at the time, right? However, what human beings may not have known is that some of the decisions we took at the time could impact on the planet. And so fossil fuels evolved from, so there was coal. Before coal, there was, I know they had whale oil, where they would literally kill whales, to get the oil and then power, machines and whatnot. And then from whale oil, it moved to coal. And then from coal, fossil fuels came to be, and then we progressed from there on. Now, where after or rather, in the course of the studies that scientists did to determine the levels of impact from our activities on the planet, especially from burning of fossil fuels, the world became concerned, and so the United Nations was one of the leading bodies at the time to say, look, we can't let this continue. It's high time we as human beings come together, nations, countries come together and reach an agreement on how to limit the emission of carbon dioxide, which was one of the main culprits of the gases that were being leaked into the atmosphere, causing climate change, or rather exacerbating climate change, right? And so one of the first, the next slide, please. No, the next slide. Okay. And so one of the first frameworks that came into play was the setup of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was set up by the World Meteorological Organization and UNEP. Now, let me go a bit into the history of UNEP. United Nations in itself, UNEP is a subset of the United Nations. And how did UNEP even come into existence? Or rather, United Nations, it was birthed from the World Wars, right? After the First World War and then the Second World War. At the Second World War, that's when nations came together and then signed the treaty that then brought into existence the United Nations. And so the United Nations is a body that is involved in keeping the peace of the entire globe, or rather, let me not use the word globe, the peace of nations, also involved in driving sustainability, eradicating poverty, bridging the gap between, so countries that are developing in terms of welfare and whatnot. And then, of course, this climate change issue, energy issues and whatnot also came into play. And so they took up that as part of their responsibilities. Now, after this, there were other frameworks that now led on into the Paris Agreement, which was then which now created the landmark for, or rather betting the move towards energy transition and eradication of, or rather push for eradication of fossil fuels. Now, I want to focus a bit on two of these policies, which for me forms the basis for this discussion today and the discussion globally: the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. Now, the Kyoto Protocol, when it came into place, basically focused on limiting emissions. However, it did not place any responsibility on developing countries. And now one may ask, why is that? And that's because it is generally believed, even though at the time the world did not have enough data to prove that we have we had data, or rather we have data, but not enough data. But you generally believe that developing countries are not high polluters, while developed countries were at the time, even to date, high polluters, because till now, the entire Africa as a whole is emitting less than 4% from the last time I checked. And so, because of it, the Kyoto Protocol basically focused on developing countries limiting their emissions. And I mean, rightly so, it kind of gave a balanced opinion at the time. Reason being, industrialization was taking place rapidly in the developed countries. There was really no industrialization in developing countries, so it was a fair deal. However, it raised criticism, it raised concern on that move because, again, I want to. This is my own personal opinion. When you have a policy that is targeted at a group of people or a group of parties, and it's not what will happen is it may be good to have at the time, but as the policy continues to roll out, eventually the developing countries will catch up with the developed countries. And so if you don't have a policy that can encompass the entire countries into one, and then probably set targets in terms of, oh, okay, how much you can contribute over, how much you will contribute over time, and how much you should cut down in terms of emissions, then it could be a potential problem. And so the Paris Agreement was born at COP21, that then brought in all countries and said, so every country came in and said, about 196 countries said, okay, you know what, let's agree. We want to limit emissions and we want to bring it to as low as 1.5 degrees Celsius, right? And so one of the fallouts of that agreement was that countries were now required to develop what is being referred to now as the nationally determined contributions, which was a 5-year, or is supposed to be a 5-year document where you basically have a plan to transit from polluting fuels. So, for instance, Nigeria, as a case study, we are oil and gas producers, and that's basically forms a huge part of our revenue, about 90% of our revenue. However, less than 20% of our GDP. And so if we are heavily dependent in terms of our economic activities on oil and gas, it would mean we would need to have a plan that suits us. And that plan is being captured in our nationally determined contributions document. And so one of the fallouts of that nationally determined contribution commitment is that beyond national contributions or national contributions in terms of your plan, the need to also have regional policies that would then fit into the Paris Agreement was also, became a topic for discussion over time. And then from this Paris Agreement, one of the key things that the NDCs now looked at, or rather focused on, was the development of renewable or clean energies, energy efficiencies, climate adaptations, just transitions, climate financing, and integration with UN Sustainable Development, and then carbon pricing, which is what the first speaker had spoken on. Now, this is basically just to sum up everything I've said so far on the nationally determined contribution. Now, based on the agreement and the nationally determined contributions plan, again, like what we saw in the previous slide, energy transition was bettered. Energy transition means moving away from dirty fuels, moving into clean or green and renewable fuels. Now, before renewable fuels became a topic for discussion, it was basically centered on clean energy. But however, because the NDCs needed to link up to the United Nations Sustainable Development, which means we want to be able to plan for or provide for our future, to our today, and also provide for our future tomorrow. So we don't want to eat our future today, right? That's what sustainability is all about, ensuring that you are able to plan for your today and then leave enough room for your tomorrow. And so they said, okay, beyond clean energy, let's also look at renewables. how do we ensure that we are developing energy systems that can outlast generations, or outlast, our living onto our children and children's children to come and whatnot. And so that's how renewable energies became a thing. And then so we would then look at the energy systems emergence. Now, basically, there are three forms of energy as of now. You have, like I said, the clean energy, the green energy, and the renewable energy. Clean energy is our energy system that ensure limitation of emissions. So it limits or has little to zero emissions of carbon dioxide or methane and whatnot, and other polluting gases. And then you have the green energy, which is basically from green sources again that are not polluting. However, you now have renewable energies that are clean energies. Now, if you look at my slide very well, you would see that nuclear energy, for instance, sorry, there's a mistake in this slide. Nuclear energy, for instance, it's a clean energy, but it's not renewable. So that was supposed to be a non-renewable energy. While you have renewable energy that is also clean in terms of the solar energy, the wind energy, and the geothermal energy. And then you have renewable energies that are not green, which means they also pollute. And you're talking about hydropower and then biomass. And so biomass basically refers to burning of, so for instance, you use firewood, that's biomass, right? So any bio means life, and then the mass of it. So when you burn, something that has the potential, and we know that basically anything that has life has potential to emit carbon and methane, because that's basically what it constitutes, carbon and methane, right? And so this is just an overview of the kind of energy systems. But before I go on to the next slide, I want to speak on something on this on the energy system. However, let's dwell a bit on this. Nigeria is a case study again, and I'm sure for Africa and some other developing countries. When you talk about the Paris Agreement and the nationally determined contribution, one would ask, how does it impact developing nations? How do we get affected? How can we plan to mitigate the impact it will have on us? And that's basically one of the key things that have militated against the success of this climate policy that was agreed upon at the COP21. Can anybody hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can. We are still here.
Okay. So and in doing that, Nigeria basically looked at, okay, how can, and not just Nigeria, generally developing countries, how can we mitigate against this? Which means we would need a couple of things to be in place. First of all, we would not say we are transiting away from fossil fuels completely. We would have to stagger the transition process, which what some other developing countries agreed with, and then the energy mix system came into play. Energy transition and energy mix are somewhat similar but very different, because energy transition is basically saying leave fossil fuels behind and move to clean renewable energies. Energy mix is saying for countries who are not at par with the developed world, who are still building industrialization, who still experience energy poverty, who still have a crunch in their economic activities and whatnot, we are saying we need a mix. We need to pull different energy sources together so that we can develop, and then as time goes on, we continuously phase out fossil fuel. And so the plan to phase out became a thing. Before then, it was phased down. So it was phased out rather. But after the NDCs came in, and then of course several COPs had gone on, countries began, especially the developed world, began to understand that look, these nations will probably not buy into phase out completely. So let's phase down, which means it's a gradual process. we continue to just move out of it and out of it and out of it, continue to just bring down our dependence on fossil fuels. So that's just a context I wanted to give. Now, energy policies impacts on national policies. Again, it's just basically the adoption of the NDCs, and then we move towards an energy transition through the national climate policies, then the Nigerian Energy Transition Plan, which is in our NDC. And let me talk a bit about the Nigerian Energy Transition Plan. Now, contextually, from what I do, one of the plans we have is, okay, we know we are highly dependent on fossil fuels in terms of our revenue. And because we also know that we have issues with energy, we basically can't even power, our country for even 24 hours effectively, right? And we know that there are also people who live below $1, which means they're actually individuals who cannot access energy, which, of course, linking it up to economic activities, which would mean even small and medium scale enterprises, your small kiosks here, your small cold room here and there, these people struggle to power their businesses, right? And we all know economically, SMEs drive economies. The big guys don't usually drive economies. It's the small guys because they employ more. So they have more capacity to employ, which would then impact on the gross domestic product of a country. And so Nigeria has said, okay, we have a pool of energy systems in terms of fossil fuel. We are not going to deal with coal. Coal is too dirty. Oil and gas is one of the things that bring money to us, especially for oil. And Nigeria has explored more oil in over how many years of exploration than it has gas. Now, what we are saying is we have gas and we have gas in abundance. What we will do is we will use gas as a transition fuel. And this is one of the things you see in other climes in developing nations. China, again, for example, is fast growing, but China is also highly populated. India also is fast growing. India is highly populated. So all these countries have their plans towards transiting from oil from fossil fuels, dirty fuels. But in the interim, monies that are being gotten from the fossil fuels are being used to develop other non-fossil energy systems, right? And then so the Climate Change Act establishment and whatnot. So this is basically the energy policies impact on national policies. This is just an example of some of the policies that have come up from the Paris Agreement. I can't really speak much on the EU energy systems and whatnot, but I can speak more on the African system. And then the drawbacks. Now, one of the drawbacks in policy implementation, let's leave climate change for a bit, just general policy implementation. Any policy that is not built on data is usually going to be flawed. Any policy that is not backed up by political will, any policy that is not also backed up by concrete financing. So if you don't have a good financial plan, that policy is bound to fail at some point in time. Any policy that also is not trans-institutional, it doesn't bring different sectors or different institutions in a client, that policy is bound to fail. And then any policy that does not address the economic or socio-economic needs or impact of the people in that client is also bound to fail. I'll give you a good example outside of climate change. Nigeria has energy poverty. Nigeria cannot light up. However, there is a policy in Nigeria that says that you cannot buy your fuel in kegs, in jerry cans, right? Now, Nigeria is a place or is a country where we don't even have a deepening in terms of distribution of energy. Even the fuel we produce, and then the processed one, which is the PMS. Do we even have ways to get this product to individual homes to industries and whatnot. We don't have that system. So it means you literally have to go to the filling stations and buy, right? Whether you want to fill your gas in your house to cook or you want to buy your kerosene and whatnot, you literally have to go and buy, which is not so in developed worlds. In developed worlds, your gas finishes, all you need to do is to pay for your gas and it comes straight into your kitchen and you can cook, right? You don't need to buy fuel to power your house, to have your fan rolling or your ACs working, because that power is already sorted. All you need to do is pay your power bills and you're sorted. But in Nigeria, that's not the case, which means individuals have to do this and carry out these transactions manually. And then you put a policy that says you cannot buy fuel in your jerry cans. Now, while families, households can manage, how about SMEs? How would they manage? Your small restaurant that employs 2 to 3 persons, how would they buy the fuel? Because you also don't have trucks that can also deliver in quantities that are required at every location. So that's a flaw with a policy. And now talking about the entire climate change policy, when the Paris Agreement was agreed upon, I personally feel that while the Kyoto Protocol had its flaws of not planning for the future, it actually was very expedient at the time it was passed because of the unique position developing nations found themselves in. And so that on its own had already even created a ground for rather limiting the effectiveness of the policy. Now, what is data-driven policy in terms of climate change? For any nation to be able to plan effectively, you have to have data. Nigeria, again, as a case study, do we have data in Nigeria? Not enough data, if at all we even have data. Do we even know how many households we have, how many SMEs are existing, where these SMEs are located, how much do we need in terms of energy for industrialization, for households, hospitals and whatnot? We don't even have this data, right? We also don't have data in terms of, okay, so the world is moving away from fossil fuels and renewable energies. Do we even know the reserves of renewables we have? We don't even know. Do we know how to harness the materials needed to develop some of this renewable energy in terms of solar and solar systems, the wind and whatnot? Do we even know how to harness these elements that are trapped within our subsurface area? We also have geothermal energy, although not in a proven reserve. But have we started looking at how to, okay, let's explore and see how much reserve we have and then plan for it, so that by the time we are getting to the point where we are phasing out of fossil fuel, especially for gas as a transition fuel, we are moving into this gradually, and this is how we plan, right? And all these are dependent on data. And so if a country does not have data, that country can never build a policy that is workable. Then in terms of finance, beyond the financial pledges of developed nations, how are countries able to manage their own resources effectively to ensure that the monies you get from your transition fuels are being rechanneled to developing your renewable or clean energy system? How are you planning for that? Because yes, the developed nations owe it as a matter of duty to developing nations to pay for, in quotes, the pollution they have caused over the years. But we also need, as nations, developing nations, to plan for ourselves. In terms of politics, globally, it's not just in Nigeria. There has been a lot of debate on climate change. Oh, climate change is a hoax, climate change is not a hoax, and whatnot. So there are different school of thoughts, and rightly so. So as a scientist, when you read different literatures, you would understand where each of these literatures are coming from, why they're arguing from the point of argument, right? And so you've had leaders, world leaders say, okay, take a position and say, look, my country, this is how I want to do it, because I do not believe climate change is happening, or it's happening at the rate the world is clamoring it is happening at. A good example, Donald Trump, drill baby drill. So I mean, he's a typical example. A good example again is what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. Russia have had running battles with Ukraine, and then the world powers came and said, "Oh, Russia, you need to stop. Don't do that. Ukraine is a sovereign nation." And then they had to take stance on Russia in terms of, "Oh, we're going to take you out of the Swiss bank, cut your flow and whatnot." In response, what did Putin do? Putin cut his supply of gas to the entire Europe. And fortunately, I was in Europe just around that time, and I know some of the actions that were taken, and those are politically driven decisions. So sometimes politics can also impact on the workability of a policy. Now, energy poverty. This one centers specifically on developing nations. So there's something the first presenter said about the impact of the climate carbon pricing on developing nations, as studied by Salusi and Ade Dion, or the other name, two names, right? And then it just made me realize how much this Paris Agreement have probably did not put into consideration before asking nations to do away with fossil fuel at the same rate and at the same time. So, for instance, carbon pricing, it's a way to save money, get money in terms of, oh, so I sell you, credits for you to be able to emit, and then I get back the money, and then that money can then be used to finance energy transition, right? However, when you do the cap and I've forgotten the cap and something, and then the carbon pricing. So when you do the carbon pricing approach, and then the cap and I've forgotten the other cap and something, but basically the terminology has to do with, oh, I put a cap to how much you can emit, and then I sell you permits to emit to that extent I have put a cap to. What would then happen?
Cap and trade.
Yeah, cap and trade. So that's it, cap and trade. Yeah. So I put a cap to how much you can emit, and then I trade permits on how much of that cap I'm giving to you to emit. It's a good to have system. It's a way to make money, buy money back, and use it for continuous development. However, on us who are heavily dependent on exporting our fossil fuels, what will happen to countries like Nigeria who export energy out of the country just so that we can get money to develop our own nation? That's a big problem. That's one of the challenges you have. A country where you cannot also power your country, you can't power industries, people are basically in darkness 24 hours of the day. How exactly is it going to affect these people? Because when you put those caps, what will happen is a trade system. It's a market is based on demand and supply, and market forces like carbon pricing can affect how much energy would cost. So, for instance, I want to ship fossil crude oil to, say, the US. The ships also is going to emit as it goes, right? And then the US puts a cap in terms of how much you can emit, and then you have to pay to buy those permits to emit. And then the carbon market, so you basically pay. What will happen is by the time Nigeria sells that crude oil and pays that fine, it is going to increase our own overhead costs in terms of how much it has cost us to produce and sell that crude, right? Which would then mean that by the time we are now reinvesting in terms of now developing energy systems, every investor will put that cost on the consumer. That is for certain. The consumers will pay for that cost. Now, even the people who are even being sold this crude oil to, by the time your country is imposing that tax on the country importing, that importer will also factor in that tax that has been imposed as part of the pricing to sell to you. So it's a two-way system. It's not so at the end of the day, it's not a win-win for anybody. But then again, I believe there are workable ways to ensure that this carbon pricing is fairly and justly, and is fair, is just, and is very equitable. Now, institutional coordination has to do with having or driving a circular economy. So, for instance, when you're developing climate change policies, pollution or emissions don't just come from the oil and gas sector. It comes from every other sector, whether it's the agricultural sector, whether it's the fashion industry, and when it comes from each and every one of these sectors. And the question is, how is your policy able to ensure that you marry these industries or these sectors together? How are you able to bring ministries across these industries together to coordinate the planning and then the implementation of your climate policy? That's very critical in doing that. So, for instance, if you're going to produce if you're going to go into, say biomass production in terms for energy, right? That will the bulk of it will probably come from the agricultural sector in terms of food waste and whatnot. Now, remember that beyond agriculture, food is being consumed, whether it's in the oil and gas sector, whether it's in the fashion industry, because people eat every day. Food waste goes into waste every day. How are you able to coordinate all these biomass sources together, aggregate them, now determine from each of these industries, how much mass are you producing? What is the capacity for emission from each of these biomass? And I say, okay, so because oil and gas probably has the potential, hypothetically, to produce more biomass waste in terms of food waste, which will mean there will be more pollution in terms of release of methane after doing degradation of this food waste and whatnot, or release of carbon dioxide and whatnot. How are you then able to say, okay, so for oil and gas, this is how we plan to manage the biomass production or the release of emissions from biomass production. So you can say, I want to build or I want to develop pits where you can. So in Canada, for instance, I was in Canada at one point where they are currently doing an innovation where they would create pits and then they would connect it to a system where the methane, as degradation goes on, the system kind of sucks out the methane and is being stored in storage facilities and then used to generate energy. Now, these biomass sources are being pulled from different sectors, whether the agri sector and whatnot, and then they are being pulled into that central system where they then aggregate to produce their energy. So that's basically what institutional coordination requires. And then this is just basically talking about emerging policies that have emerged over time from the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Now, one of the things I like about these policies in general is that they have now gone beyond just paperwork, and they've started considering the key issues around or militating against the effectiveness of the Paris Agreement. A good example is now climate change policies are more focused on data and they are more digitalized, right? So emissions are being measured. For instance, in Nigeria, after the passage of the PIA, the PIA, which is the Petroleum Industry Act, by the way, passed in 2021, centered on two key things in terms of emissions. One, methane tracking. So sort of what we have now done in Nigeria is to say, look, every oil and gas producer, you need to have a technology in place to be able to measure your methane emissions, whether it's from your producing facility or whether it's from even as small as your kitchen, in terms of your food waste, in terms of the your gas cookers that you use to cook and whatnot. And so we are able to measure these emissions, and then when we measure it, we're able to say, okay, from these emissions, how much, for instance, if you are emitting about, say, 10 metric tons or something, so 10 CO2 of methane, right? So that based on that your emission, and I'm able to say, okay, can you then see in terms of, okay, your kind of facility, why are you emitting so much? And then how can you then mitigate against that emission in terms of, okay, you want to retrofit your facility, make them emission proof. Your pipelines, if there are leakages, fix them so that they don't leak and then emit toxic gases into the atmosphere and whatnot. We are also trying to ensure that we reduce flaring in Nigeria. So there's been an introduction of gas flare penalties. So we are saying, look, we need you to stop flaring gases, and so we are going to sort of impose a tax on you if you want to flare. And then we'll keep imposing that tax on you until you're able to retrofit your facility so that you're not flaring gas, you're simply using that gas, which is what brought about the decade of gas in Nigeria. So we are saying, stop flaring your gas, because that's a major source of pollution. Rather, let's take this gas, let's harness it, and let's deepen gas penetration in Nigeria and ensure that homes and industries are powered using gas, using gas and whatnot. So that's basically what Nigeria is doing. And of course, this is one of the good things about the Paris Agreement. So the environmental and economic evaluation considerations are more centered on three things. So you now have market-driven policies in terms of carbon pricing. Now, take for instance, Nigeria is trying to monitor their methane emissions. So if we're able to fully track our methane emissions from different sectors, whether it's oil and gas or agriculture or the fashion industry and whatnot, we are able to then say, okay, how can we then buy into this new trend of carbon pricing, the carbon markets? How can we also ensure that even if we are not buying into it as a country, we are also ensuring that we are not overpriced. The other countries are not imposing more than we can pay. So if we are able to track our own, we can say, okay, this is what we are, this is what we have. We can use nature-based approach to mitigate our emissions. Say, okay, based on how much we are emitting and based on the expanse of maybe land we have set aside for as carbon sinks, this is how much emissions we are able to mitigate. Now, in terms of our negotiation power, if we know exactly how much we pollute or we release into the atmosphere, by the time we are going to a negotiation in terms of how much we can pay or what is the cap or limit for our emission, we're able to say, look, you can't charge us this way because, hey, this is what we emit. So, I mean, we just can't. Then you also have, or we also plan to have policies that are more integrated in terms of, okay, we are trying to transit from fossil fuels, but we are also ensuring that there is adequate financial plans for our transition. Our health systems are also doing well, and general economic development. And also, we are also trying to ensure that there is more inclusivity rather in the development of these policies. And then we one of the sports, however, in terms of enforceability through laws, we are still developing on that aspect. And I believe generally the world is also developing in terms of enforceability, because everybody will not transit at the same pace. Not everybody has the capacity to, and that's why. So it's still challenging, but I believe we are getting there. And then how can policymakers help? So basically, policymakers or anybody who's just interested in ensuring that climate change policy becomes a reality and not just on paper, is that we are able to, first of all, we need to start keeping data as policymakers or someone who intends to be in the policy space. You should be able to keep data. You should be able to design workable policies. So for instance, if a country says climate change is a need that I need to address, it means I need to prioritize climate change policies. I need to put policies in place that can help to mitigate both climate change emissions or emission-related climate change issues. We're also able to put in policies that will help to adapt to the energy transition so that the economic activities of the country does not suffer. We are also able to ensure political stability, which is one of the key issues too or that affects policies. So in a country where you're not even sure of what policy will be rolled out, so today the government is saying this is it, tomorrow the government has come and say no, this is not it, we are going this way. So there's just a lot of instability. And then also in countries where you have a lot of unrest, wars and whatnot, these are the things that can destabilize the politics of a nation. And so when you have that, it means the world will not be able to transit at the same time. There will be a slow or snail-paced transition. You also have the local financial allocation, which I talked about. You have institutional coordination, then stakeholder engagement and public institution is very easy. The more everybody, even to the last man who probably did not go to school, is able to understand what climate change is all about and how it affects him or her, then that person is able to take small decisions at their own small capacities to ensure we protect our ecosystem. Then we talk about our transparency and then capacity building. Now, this is also a very huge challenge. There's a phenomenon called the just transition, which is part of what the NDCs speaks to. In countries that are developing, the argument is you have a lot of people in the oil and gas space, in the fossil fuel space. And so these individuals who work in this space may not have the capacity, the skill to transit and not suffer financial or economic losses. However, I have a different school of thought. The reason is that most of the skill sets required for oil and gas production, right, is basically transferable to renewable energy production. For instance, if you're talking about geothermal energies, you're going to have to drill, you're going to have to design facilities and whatnot. We already have drill engineers, we already have mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, environmental engineers and whatnot, who basically understands what it means to go into this process. Even if you're also talking about harnessing, elements that will be used to develop or manufacture solar panels and whatnot in terms of lithium, environmentalists, electrical engineers from the oil and gas space, mechanical engineers, everybody will, all we just need to do is, okay, this skill set you have, how do you then fit into the current energy system? That is a question of, there has to be intentional policies. The government has to sit and say, look, this is how we want to scale it. So people that are in this bracket, mechanical engineers, this is probably how you're going to fit in terms of renewable energy production. So these are the additional skills that you may need to take on in addition to what you already know. Then in terms of innovation, we already have the oil and gas industry, as we all would agree,
Sorry,
is
can
a
I
very,
continue a bit just to say
yeah,
that the
please.
time is really fast spent.
Oh,
If you can
okay.
round up, yes.
Yeah, so we are
Wanted to
done.
get some
We are
questions
actually
towards
done.
the end.
Yeah, so we are actually done. So basically, we are done with, okay, so your opportunities, I will speak about that, and this is just my conclusion. But so let me dwell a bit on this. Now, I just need to ask a question before I take the question. If I take a question, does opportunities exist for young aspiring policy professionals? If someone can just tell me before I then, say make a comment or two on it very quickly, and then we then take the questions. I just want it to be interactive, sort of.
Yes, I think so. There are policy
Okay.
policy for young professionals. I think so, madam.
Okay. So can you give me an example of an opportunity you see for young
Well,
professionals?
I think there are more than enough opportunities. Like, I would take my sphere of influence, which is waste management. In waste management, opportunities like creation of circular jobs and all that through circular economy will lead to creation of circular jobs. Waste value chain.
Okay, so that's very good. Beautiful answer, beautiful answer. So yes, he has actually answered very well. The truth is there's a lot of opportunities that exist. Like the first presenter said, I think the first thing for every young professional is to first of all understand the energy system, understand what energy is all about, understand the different energy systems, understand how these energy systems are built or how they are developed. Once you understand that, then the next thing is to begin to focus on the gaps. And that's actually policy. Policy actually focuses on needs, right? To address needs or to enhance a process. That's what policies are for. And so if you are able to understand, you can identify problems, whether it's in waste management whether it's in renewable energy production, whether it's in the drilling process. There are policies that have to be put in place in each of these energy developments. And so that's where young people can play and bring up policy ideas. And you don't actually have to be a regulator, you don't have to be a minister, you don't even have to be the president and whatnot, or in the Senate House, because policies are usually built from the ground up. They are built from thought leaders, they are built from activism, pressure groups, even the academia, like the earlier speaker said, everybody has to just have their boots on, boots on ground, do your research, coming up with problems and then solutions, and then you can post these solutions as a policy question. You can put it to the government and say, look, this is the gap I see, and this is how I think we can tackle it. And so these are the policies we think that can help us harness the gains of the solution we are providing. And so with this, I think it's a wrap. If there are questions, we can then take them. Thank you.
Delany, are you there? Thank you so much, Ma. Thank you so much, Onyeka. It was a great presentation. Abdullahi, are you there?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. That was really a very good presentation, honestly. And I picked up a number of new things myself. Um, and there have been a number of things that I've always mixed up, and this is really an eye opener. So thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I'm sure we all have one or two questions to ask. We don't have much time, so we might have to cut off the questions a bit, but I can see a few hands already. So okay, we already have Mr. Olumide on hold. So Mr. Olumide first, then we can have Dorcas. Mr. Olumide, please go ahead.
All right. My question is to the second speaker, madam.
Dorcas, please go.
All right.
Oh,
She said, hello.
he doesn't want to give it up this time around. All
Hello.
right, please go ahead, sir.
Hello. My question is to the second speaker. She spoke about, coming up, not being the president of government or governor. But the point I'm making is, how do we the issue of silos, where there are policies? How do we break down policy silos? That is my question. Not to take more time. How do you break down the silos? So that's my question. That's all. Hello?
Yes, we hear you. Can we take the second question at once, and so that all of them can be answered? Okay, I see Abdullahi is also experiencing some network issues. So I'll take Dorcas.
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I just want to find out, does development countries have to always follow the international policy for us to be sustainable? Because when we look at the energy transition that we are talking about, if Africa, we don't take care, it will come to a time that our fossil fuel will be stranded. You see, when we look at the developed country, they've already explored, they have taken our raw materials to add value to it, and they have developed. Maybe they were having foresight that a time will come, like they have to go to green energy. When we look at Africa, they are polluting most. Now, they want us to use our land to do adaptation projects so that they come and buy the carbon credit. So that we shouldn't even touch our adaptation project, let's say plantation, when they come to buy the carbon credits. It's for them. Africa, we are now using our arable land to do this plantation. It will come to a time that we will be in food insecurity. My question is, do we always have to follow the international policy for us to be sustainable? Or Africa, we can look at what we have to develop our policy so that it will benefit the citizens and the generation to come. Thank you.
That is a quite reflective question, and I would really love our two speakers to shed insights on them. So the first question that it was asked by Mr. Olumide, I would allow Ma Onyeka to answer that, and then the second question can then be spoken on by our two speakers.
Okay, thank you so much, Shalom. Thank you, Mr. Olumide, for the question, but I would need context. When you say policy silos, in terms of, so I don't answer wrongly, if you could give me context as to what you're speaking to, so I can then.
Okay, what I mean, my intention is that in terms of coordination between ministries and multi-sectoral approach, that is the vertical approach to policy implementation and policy design. That is my question. How to break down the silos in terms of the vertical approach to policy development?
Okay, so beautiful question. So I talked about institutional approach. Now, first of all, in driving institutional integration, it has to come from the top. And the reason being, the House of Assembly, the Senate, are the ones that develop most times the acts, which then trickles into the regulations and then the guidelines and whatnot. However, when you develop an act that is not multi-sectoral, for instance, hypothetical example, what you would then find is that you would have agencies which usually are implementers of the law deciding to this is my own kind of syndrome in Nigeria. So I'll give you an instance. We've seen issues where an industry that is supposed to have multiple players have just one player in it, because that player is scared that the next player is going to, overreach his or her own mandate. They're not able, the feeling of, I'm not able to ensure that this other agency or this ministry is not overdoing themselves. Take, for instance, the Ministry of Environment in Nigeria is supposed to coordinate all environmental issues and respond accordingly. So drive policies that attend to environmental issues across all sectors. But we have had instances where the Ministry of Environment focuses on, for instance, the oil and gas industry, because it seemingly is more lucrative, right? And so the only way to cut or to ensure that the ministry is able to ensure that its mandate is cutting across sectors and bringing together sectors to achieve a common goal is that the top is supposed to make a very strict policy that says, look, Ministry of Environment, this is exactly what you're supposed to do. You're a ministry, you're supposed to coordinate the drafting of regulations sectorially. You're supposed to ensure that you're monitoring the progress of the implementation of these regulations in each of these sectors and report back to us. So by the time you put a mandate for monitoring and reporting back, they are forced to look beyond just where they feel they want to focus on, and then find a way to marry the entire sectors together to achieve a common goal. Another thing again, whether we like it or not, your policy is as good as your implementers. If you have implementers who have selfish interests, financial gains from a policy, what will happen is that you will see that syndrome of, oh, it's my own, let nobody encroach into this thing. So again, I advocate for ensuring that anybody you have put in charge to manage and implement a policy, that person has to be adequately compensated. Now, beyond compensation, there are also human beings who are greedy, which then boils down to integrity issues, right? And so if you're able to rule out the issue of, oh, this person is not being paid well and whatnot, the next focus should be weeding out the bad eggs. Once you use one person as a scapegoat and mean it, There's something that the aspiring president that ran with our now president said. He said something. I, as a governor, you don't see me doing this. You don't see me taking bribe. You don't see me spending in this manner. So because you don't see me, the probability that somebody under me will do it is very slim. Because you know that if you do it and I get you, you're not going to get away with it. So you also have to have the top being very sincere and maintain integrity. If not, you also have people at the bottom who are answerable to the top, who are also very corrupt, and then would then hamper the progress of that policy and also create a silos where everybody is trying to protect their territory and say, oh, this is my territory. Don't encroach because there's something to gain from it and I don't want to share. So no, they're not looking at the common good, they're simply looking at their own good. So I don't know if that answers your question or
Exactly. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that insightful question, Mr. Olumide. I do have my thoughts on it, but I'll allow Dr. Jacopo to respond to the second question.
yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. I mean, I was particularly when the audience asked us the questions, I was reflecting that when we talk about policies, we definitely need to consider them as a whole. So what I would suggest in general is not to think about one policy as an instrument that can solve a problem, but as a part of a complex mechanism, assuming an approach, a policy mix approach. In terms of social issues, I definitely think that combining the environmental dimension with the social one is the key to achieve the goal of climate policy. And what else? Can you remind me that they did one point asked about the social dimension?
Yeah. She really emphasized on allowing developing countries still follow international policies. And she made a specific instance where when we talk about carbon trading, for example, and maybe Africa is the one investing in the afforestation, so tree plantation, and international countries come to buy carbon credit from Africa. That means we are sacrificing our lands. We are going to probably enter into food insecurity or things like that relative to that, based on the fact that we are trying to meet up with the carbon credit that we need to sell to other companies, or to other countries. So the question is, how can we protect our developing countries, especially in terms of some of the international policies that have been
That's true. That's a good point. It's not only not only about the deforestation, carbon credits. That's super true, but also, about improving renewable technologies like the agrivoltaics, which has an impact on land use, for instance, or nature-based solutions. What I could say, now I see why. Well, the main point here is again, to my view, to establish a conversation, and also to make it clear that should be different like paces to reach the international climate goals, and to avoid negative externalities like what you said, like the problems in managing what is requiring to do from the global framework, let's say. Well, that's a very good point. Actually, one of the main instrument is climate cooperation through COP meetings. I was thinking about, for example, the overall discussion on Article 6, which came out from the last COP in Baku. So establishing for an international carbon market, but also taking care of local specific needs. So yeah, basically my final thought is that we don't need to impose, we do not need to impose something. We need to talk and also to put to require a stronger effort to the jurisdictions which contributed more to historical emissions, like the Western countries, like the United States and European countries. I think that would be like a useful way to show from the European perspective the willingness to act in a fair way. And on the other side, from, for example, an African perspective, to demonstrate that also there is the willingness to act and to push to achieve goals, but with the proper velocity, let's say.
Thank you so much. I know that you said as much as possible because it's a very reflective question. It's a question that we kind of really try to draw deeper into different insight and different institutions. So thank you so much for that main point of not imposing, because I think that is the best way, really considering local specific factors and understanding that different countries have different dimensions and all of that. So thank you so much. Not to stress on my own talk, I do see another hand by Excel. So I'll let him ask his question and then we'll come back to responses from our speakers. Excel, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you to both speakers. I joined just for the second speaker due to an engagement. But from everything she said, she talked about inclusivity and stakeholder engagement, data-driven decision-making, implementation and enforceability, awareness, capacity building, equity and access. And most of these dimensions, they talk both on the economic and non-economic dimensions. And this is more like a next steps kind of inquiry. So if the speaker in question, so we currently we have a project or a series of projects that look at energy justice in Nigeria as a case study, and looking at the different energy transition projects that are ongoing, focusing majorly on renewable energy. And would like to know if, because she's talked about, one thing is the data-driven decision making, and the data in this case, we know it's lacking. So just since we have projects that look at this, like research works that try to look at communities where these projects have been done, and if she would be willing to, like, if we can reach out to her for like a collaboration, or if she could come as a critical reviewer more to look at the projects, and if we can take that up as a next step in trying to address each of these issues, right? Because our projects look at more inclusivity and both gender inclusivity and data-driven decision making. So this is more for the second speaker. Sorry, I don't know. I wasn't here for the first speaker, so I cannot say. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Excel. Before I call on Madam Onyeka to ask to respond to the question, I think we will take a final question from Edwin, and that will be all for today. I'm so sorry that we cannot take more hands for now, but I do know that each speaker is open for more discussions, and so you can reach out to them on LinkedIn. You can connect with them via LinkedIn and just mention that you were part of the Renew Education July edition webinar, and you can ask your questions directly to them. But just because of our time, I would just take finally from Edwin, and both speakers will respond to Excel and Edwin's question.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity. Because there are gaps in the policies and efforts for sustainability, please, are there and these gaps also become like business opportunities? So far we explored that, and I like the question from just the last speaker, the last question I made as well. So if there are gaps that they turn up to business opportunities, I think I can ask that, then I can connect later for other questions. Thank you.
So if I get the question correctly, is it if there are policy gaps that can be used as a business opportunity?
Okay, let me just say this way. Because we have policy gaps, are there areas in those gaps where private sector players can come in, and then it's now business opportunity in that sense?
Oh, okay. So I would like Onyeka to respond to Excel's question and then briefly to Edwin's on.
Thank you again to both speakers that just asked a question. Shalom, could you please recap the questions? I didn't quite get them clearly.
Yes, okay. For Excel, he's working on a couple of projects that has to do with
Okay.
intersectoral justice. And he was asking, because you talked about data-driven research, so he was asking if there are resources or ways that he can collaborate with you, or like to come as a critical reviewer, or just how he can really proceed with such kind of research given the less availability of data. And the second question from Edwin is the gaps in policies. I think if that can be used by the private sector in terms of like business opportunities. I think that's what I grasped from the question.
Okay. Okay, so thank you so much for the questions, Mr. Excel, and I didn't quite get the name of the other.
Mr. Edwin.
Okay, Mr. Edwin. Yeah. So there's something I want to go to. So yeah, so for the energy justice project that Mr. Excel said is embarking on. Oh yes, I'm willing, open to reviewing his work if he shares it with me. I'm open to it. At least I have some experience in data gathering and whatnot. What was the second part of his question? So if I was willing, and was it something else? If I was willing, and what was the second part of the question?
Okay, sorry, I'll just come in. Yeah, thank you so much. I just said if we could reach out to you, because myself and Shalom is aware of this. We're working on some projects. If we could kind of bring you in, so we're kind of framing the questions and everything. If we could connect with you after on the project.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. I think that's workable, that's doable. Now on the aspect of, before I go to the second question, the aspect of data, Nigeria does not have data, so one of the key foundations of your project should center on developing digital tools to enhance the effectiveness of your project. I don't know what the project is exactly going to speak to in terms of, are you planning to produce a policy statement from your project, or you're trying to get financing to, help, bridge certain energy gaps that is in country. I'm not, so whatever your project is speaking to, you have to have basis for gathering data. There has to be a foundation for that. Now, on to the second question. Second question was centered on what again, Sharon, please? Or second question?
Was on the policy gaps that could,
Okay,
if private sector
opportunities.
could use it as business opportunity.
Yes, beautiful. Yes, so yes, for every policy, the moment a policy is being released, it starts to create bubble effect, whether it's in terms of gaps or in terms of opportunities or opportunities from gaps, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, for instance, there is a gap in data, right? We have seen. And so you find policies that are not well developed because you did not consider certain extraneous factors that could have probably influenced the policy for or against the final decision that was taken. And so you can have private sectors coming to say, oh, yes, I can build to software, to help track this data. I'll give you an instance. I was doing a research for someone I was trying to find out the energy consumption rate of Kenya and how much Kenya has fared with their renewable energy production and utilization. And I went to different databases. I couldn't find enough data to do that research. So what I had to then do is I had to use a back model to continue the research. And so, I mean, I'm sure the first speaker, the FSR guy would understand. Sometimes you can play with data, I mean, in a way that so you can just bridge your gap and get the results you're looking for. So yes, that's a big opportunity. In terms of financing, CSOs are springing up now, right? It's a gap in policy implementation. And so you can go into that space and take it up and start to find, investors who are willing to come. So for instance, Nigeria is currently doing a host community development trust drive where they're trying to empower local communities in the Niger Delta who have been affected by oil and gas activities and whatnot. And we've I have seen a couple of CSOs that have come to say, oh, this is what we think we can do in terms of partnering with the regulators. I've seen things like that happen. So we want to partner with you. We want to be able to bring in investment in XYZ sector, within the local communities. I mean, you can also be involved in, now there's something I said during the early course of my presentation. Oil and gas, for instance, provides for 90% of our revenue, but less than 20% of the GDP. Why is that? Because oil and gas, while very lucrative and very financially rewarding, also employs very few people. Why? Because we have not been able to open up the sector. Now, this is where private individuals can come in. I read a book written by Babs or Motora, and he said something very critical. You have a lot of individuals in Nigeria who are investors, so to say, in oil and gas technology, but they are unwilling to take the burden of bringing it home. So all they just do is act as middlemen, right? And then just, oh, okay, and if that happens, what will happen is that they're not able to have a lot of players in that field. Because when a company picks one person as their middleman, you cannot have multiple distributors. And listen, so private sectors can come together amongst themselves. Oh, we want to co-invest so that we can build a hub of technology, whether it's in the gas space, which is the transition fuel for Nigeria, or in the renewable energy development. We have lithium, for instance, in Nigeria, which are being harnessed. They are by individuals, local artisans who don't even understand the exposures or in terms of their health exposure, in terms of how much they're exposing the environment to degradation. And these are the kind of opportunities that they can look into and say, okay, this is where I think I can invest, and this is how my investment or my attempt at investing can drive policy development to better the policy or create a policy that can address a need. And I don't know if that answers the question, but I think those are the ways you can go about it.
you so much. I don't know if Dr. Jacopo wants to respond or we can do call it a day for today. I know we're far beyond ahead of time. I'm so sorry about
No, but thank you. No, I agree with um, that. Like, yeah, what also so interested in what the other esteemed speaker said on the sector, on the energy sector and oil and gas sectors. And I would just want to thank you again for the invitation. It was
Thank you
very
so
interesting,
much.
and I also learned a lot.
Thank
So,
you so
looking
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing you in the future.
Yes, same here as well. So I just want to officially close the section, the Renew Education July edition, and a quick one. If you are close to where you can put on your camera, we just want to take a last just a final photo. I've been taking multiple ones during the section, but just to see the faces that have asked such insightful and mind-blowing questions. So we would appreciate it if you can turn on your camera for a second and I'll just take a quick photo. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for staying till the end. I know it was beyond the time that was set for the section. So I'm taking it on the count of three. This is 1, 2, and 3. Thank you so much. Thank you. I've taken the pictures. Thank you so much. And look forward to all of the summaries that will be on our LinkedIn. And you can follow us across our other social media platforms. This video will be uploaded as well on YouTube. And thank you so much for for being here to the end of the July edition. Thank you once again, Dr. Jacopo. It was a pleasure to have you with us. And thank you, Onyeka, for the insightful presentations. Thank you so much and
Thank
see you
you.
all later.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, everyone. Thank you, Shalom. Thank you, Dr. Jacobo. Nice
Thank
to
you,
make
Doctor.
your acquaintance.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much, everyone. Thank
It's a
you.
pleasure.
Have a great weekend.
Same, likewise.